Hello everyone, I'm Ben Contreras and welcome to another episode of Ben Talks About. It's been about, around a month and a half since I made another one of these, so I figured I may as well go ahead while I still got subjects that are still rather relevant enough that people still talk about. And I've actually been, if you've seen a couple of the videos I've uploaded recently on the channel in terms of Ben Talks About videos, this particular game release has been one that I've talked about quite a couple of times. Throughout the channel, and that is the release of the 9th generation of Pokemon games, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So, as you all probably know, this game has already been talked about very much in depth on the internet, both positively and also very much negatively to a couple of aspects. Some of them I'm kind of, I can understand why, but at the same time I wouldn't necessarily say I disagree, but at the same time I sort of question their critiques on the title. So I figured I may as well go ahead and give my 2 cents on the series. Well, not series, just the game itself, because, you know, I'm still relatively trying to get more and more into the Pokemon series. If you don't want to go ahead and hear me talk about like overly in depth on what exactly I enjoy and don't particularly enjoy about the game, I'll just say right now that I'm enjoying the game very much so. I do think that is a very fun game to play, both as a game as well as a Pokemon title. There isn't necessarily too many things that I really found that are necessarily negative about the game. So yeah, if you just want my quick opinion on that, I am enjoying it very much so. So, this game, more or less as people sort of expected, is very much a different sort of Pokemon game, because it sort of carries over some of the elements from both Pokemon Sword and Shield, which was the generation before this one, as well as the spin-off title Pokemon Legends Arceus, as it's a sort of free-roaming, open-world style game that still uses the same sort of mechanics as a traditional Pokemon game. It makes it into a sort of hybrid of the two, and there are some aspects of it that are really good, and there are also some aspects to it that aren't that entirely good, but I want to go ahead and get out of the way the stuff that I did enjoy about it. For one thing, I do find this region very, very fun to explore. Since it's an open world game, there's nothing necessarily restricting you from going in any direction you want to, and you're given multiple tasks to do right off the bat when you start the game, and I think that allows the player to feel like they have a lot of freedom as to what they can do, because you can do certain things in any particular order, because there's actually a lot more to the game as opposed to just collecting all of the gym badges and going to the Pokemon League and all that, which is something that you're able to do, but that is only one of 3 different things, different tasks that you can do in the title. I won't go into too many sort of spoilers in terms of, in case there are any people watching who haven't played the game yet. But yeah, overall I am enjoying, I like the fact that you're able to pretty much do whatever it is that you feel like doing in the title in any particular order, which is something that I feel like people have been asking for a very long time in terms of the series, especially when they started going 3D on consoles. They really want to have more freedom compared to what they've had in the previous game, which this game does definitely excel at. There isn't necessarily any sort of like roadblocks necessarily getting in the way of exploring the area. Another thing that I like is that is the Pokedex for this game. For one thing, they did give us a lot of they gave us a lot of variety in terms of Pokemon that are exclusive to this generation. It doesn't necessarily rely too much on rehashing Pokemon from older generations, which it still does, which basically means that kind of comes with that pretty much comes with the product, essentially. There's going to be a point where they're going to have to start relying a bit more on Pokemon from the previous games, which at the same time I can sort of understand that, but I believe I've talked about this before. If um, people who have created fan games of Pokemon are able to make entire Pokedexes of creatures that are exclusive to their game, then I don't necessarily see what's stopping the official company from making more of their own. Of course, everyone is different in terms of what they're able to imagine and make believable in the region, especially when they're trying to base it off of uh, creatures that would be very common in said region. But I still think that, but I don't really think that it's necessarily a problem here because again, the Pokedex I believe slightly over 100 new Pokemon in these two games, and I'm really glad that that's the case because I feel like a lot of the previous games have been very lackluster in terms of the amount of new Pokemon that we get. It feels like for the past few generations, starting with X and Y, which was ironically enough when they first started going to 3D, they had a bit too much of a reliance on rehashing older Pokemon. And I feel like that's one of the things that some of the previous games suffered from in terms of overall variety. But at the same time, the Pokemon that they do have in those regions are very much like they put lots of effort into it, and I feel like they did the same in this title as well. There's not necessarily any Pokemon in this 9th generation that I hate, per se. Some of them I can kind of understand why people would be kind of questioning about them. For example, one of the biggest examples is the Flamingo Pokemon, which has the name of Flamigo, which essentially just looks like just a regular flamingo. That is probably one of the only times that I can sort of understand where they're going from in terms of lack of creativity, but at the same time, you can't really go wrong when it's a flamingo Pokemon. I just think that's a nice idea. Although I will most definitely say that one of the Pokemon I am sort of disappointed by is their first attempt at a dolphin Pokemon, because people have been talking, about wanting one of those for a really, really long time, and they finally gave us one, and its first form and its evolution are essentially the exact same, and the fact that you have to level it up and evolve it in a very specific manner makes it sort of questionable as to why anyone would really use it aside from the fact that it's cute. But yes, despite that, I still think this Pokedex is very much varied, and I'm more or less satisfied with the Pokemon that we have. I haven't gotten overly far in this file. I've played it for quite a number of days since it first came out, and the fact that I'm still not even remotely close to what would be considered the halfway point really goes to show how much there is to this game, because they really did try to pack a lot into this title to make it feel like a sort of answer to a lot of the things that a majority of fans have been wanting from the previous titles in the series. So I do really enjoy that sort of aspect. I enjoy the freedom and the sort of creativity that went into creating the region. Now, despite that, there are quite the number of things that lots of people who have not been having a great time with this title do have a lot of concerns about, most of them being technical problems, and that is mostly due to the fact that people have essentially made an entire meme of finding glitches in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. You go onto places like YouTube or TikTok, and all you have to do is just type in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and you'll see a countless amount of videos of people complaining about the exact same group of glitches that they find in-game. And while I can definitely understand why people would be most definitely negative towards that, I'm not quite sure if I should consider myself lucky, but I really haven't found any sort of major game-breaking glitches that a lot of people have been finding online. I haven't seen my character fall through the entire world and having to restart a previous save file. I haven't seen any character models go absolutely crazy during certain segments of the game. I mean, there are times where the trainers will have their models completely turned around and quickly switch their position so that they're actually facing me. But aside from that, I haven't really found anything in terms of visual glitches, and I don't necessarily count the slowdown that happens when a lot of trainers are on the screen, or when the character goes far and far away from like a group of people and you can see them walking at like 2 frames per second. I don't necessarily would really consider that to be a glitch. I feel like that just sort of comes with the territory of trying to create a open world style game from the ground up on the Switch, because a lot of the titles that people have talked about that are indeed open world on the Switch, I feel like are ones that were taken from previous generations. Like for example, of course, I can't go a few minutes without mentioning Skyrim at some point. The Switch version of Skyrim is essentially the exact same as the original title, aside from the graphics being slightly more polished, and there isn't really that much in terms of like slowdown or lag or glitching in that title. The same thing goes with titles for games like Skyward Sword HD, which, while that's not necessarily open world, it is still taken from a previous console. And if another example is with Zelda as the topic, Breath of the Wild also was originally released at the same time as the Switch on the Wii U, so it sort of had to uh, um, be molded with both systems in mind to have it so that both consoles are able to handle the same amount of stuff, and I feel like both those games run perfectly fine on both systems. So it really, I think it comes to terms with trying to make one from scratch on the Switch. This is coming from the perspective of someone whose Switch collection, while it has gotten bigger, isn't overly huge, especially compared to what people have had since the Switch first launched a couple of years ago. But yeah, aside from the occasional pieces of lag, I haven't really found anything worth really complaining about in terms of glitches. So again, I don't know if I consider myself lucky at that fact, but I feel like another thing that people are sort of giving the game too much flack for is when they're they're specifically looking for glitches that happen in the game, which I feel like is sort of not necessarily the right thing to do, because you shouldn't be deliberately trying to look for flaws with a title unless you're trying to write an objective style review of it. That's just my personal opinion on that. Another thing that I think that the game does do well at is the way that the story is presented, and I'm sort of going into sort of spoiler territory, but I do feel like that the story of the game, I feel like one of the things they tried to put a lot of effort into is the story of the game, which, you know, again, is something that a lot of Pokemon fans have been wanting to look forward to, and the fact that the way that the story is structured, where you have these 3 different sort of pathways, and each one sort of like stands out on their own, where you're following this character while you're doing this part of the story. You're also able to branch out and do another part of someone's other half of an entirely like different story. I think that is something that they have never really tried before, and I do appreciate them for attempting to do so. I feel like a lot of the things don't necessarily, while I don't have that much to really complain about, it does seem like a lot of times that when you're doing one part of a person's story, the time for another person's story sort of stops until your character goes to that area to start their part of their quest line. But it feels like that, it kind of feels like time doesn't really pass during that point, and I feel like a lot of the things that you do in the game is it sort of requires you to go through all three paths at some point, because the way you travel throughout the world is actually by using the boxed legendary Pokemon right here. You essentially get these guys right as the game starts, and they basically act as your mode of transportation throughout the world. And throughout one specific quest line, you gradually, to more in more broad terms, level them up, and they are able to explore more and more of the world a lot easier. Which basically means that there's no way you're going to be able to do an entire playthrough of just one part of the story without wanting to get those power-ups for your mode of transportation right here. Because a lot of the areas require you to go to do stuff like swimming or rock climbing and all of that. It makes the journey a lot easier, and at the same time it feels like they sort of like encourage you to want to go through that story for that fact. So there's going to be a point where you're going through one story and you're going to want to do the next part of the story of another story to make your journey a lot more easier. But again, since there's nothing necessarily stopping you from branching out and doing stuff, because again, time doesn't really pass, you're not really missing anything from doing a majority of one story and immediately doing another. So I don't necessarily find that as much of a complaint, but it just seems it's just something that I sort of noticed while going through the game. But yeah, despite that, I do think that these three different stories are very good, because they sort of like, they essentially break the overall story of other Pokemon games into three different segments. Of course, one of them is the standard getting all the gym badges and all of that. One of them is, of course, having to deal with the evil team group in the game, which one thing that I'm glad that the actual evil team in this game is actually one that's actually worth a threat, as opposed to Team Skull and Team Yell from Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield, where they were basically just second fiddle to who the actual bad guys were. I'm glad that we actually got a evil team that's actually worthwhile at being an evil team. That's a major thing that I do appreciate. And again, I haven't gone too far in the game, but from what I have heard, there are parts of the story that are actually rather tragic, and it is nice that they try to put more focus on a story that can be sort of taken more seriously, although at face value it is still a Pokemon story, so it's not necessarily something too serious, but at the same time, I am glad that they're putting more of an emphasis on there. So yeah, and during this whole entire portion of during this entire group of the story, you're also a student at this sort of trainer academy, which allows you to pretty much go through actual school with different subjects to learn about for your character. One thing that sort of irks me about that, though, is the fact that trainer customization in this game is nowhere near as varied as it was in the previous generations, and that sort of comes to the term with the fact that you're basically wearing your school uniform the entire time you're playing through the game. And sure, you do have different seasonal versions of your uniform, but it does take out a lot of creativity from making your character, which, you know, despite the fact that the character creation, aside from your clothing, is probably the best that the Pokemon series has ever had, because you get so much variety of style and colors that you get for your character right before the game starts. Anything beyond that basically amounts to nothing more than which backpack would you want to wear, or what shoes you would want to wear, or what hat you would like to wear. So there's still a sort of hint in that sort of creativity, but it does still feel like the fact that the entire 70% of your character's overall design you aren't able to change, it does feel like that's a sort of step down from the previous games, although it does sort of make sense given the actual story of the game. It makes sense, but it feels like it would have been nice to have the option to change your character a little bit more than that. Also, I'm still waiting for the day that a Pokemon title allows you to change the height of your character. That would be a nice little feature that I think would bring a lot more creativity. As you can no doubt tell, I'm an absolute sucker for character creation in video games. Any game that has that sort of thing, I'm completely down with playing it. So yeah, overall, despite some of the critiques that I can sort of understand and at the same time not understand when people are concerned with this game, I'm still having a very fun time with these titles. If if you're watching this video and you haven't played it yet, and you're wondering if you still want to get it, I still would more or less recommend this title to you. Especially considering the fact that a lot of the other previous Pokemon games are starting to get out of print, and we're living in a world where even the 3DS titles, which aren't even that old, are starting to get harder and harder to find online. Yeah, I still feel like this is a very good title to play through. It does indeed have technical issues, but I do feel like they're going to, at some point, patch the game to at least fix it as much as they possibly can, because there's no way that the game's going to be absolutely perfect, because if you're constantly asking for perfection, then you're ultimately going to be disappointed in the end. So, overall, I feel like a lot of the positives of the game, like the freedom that you get when exploring the world, the story that you can branch out and do in any sort of way you want to, I think that makes the game worthwhile. So, I hope you all enjoyed me giving my 2 cents on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet right here. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know about it in the comments and all that good stuff. And until I see you all next time with hopefully something that actually seems to be rather relevant, I am Ben Contreras, and bye.